Hi guys, it's Mindy the naturopath here. I just wanted to have a chat to you today about gut health. So gut health is something that is quite dynamic. There's a lot going on when it comes to the gut. So I am just going to touch on a few things. Obviously, talking about gut health would take a long time if you were to explore all the areas, and there is a lot to discuss. So I just wanted to do a general kind of rundown of what naturopaths do when it comes to gut health and why we perceive it as so important, and also why the gut is intrinsically linked to things like food intolerances and things like that. Okay, so one of the biggest things when it comes to gut health is that we often have a history of exogenous compounds, things like drugs that we need to take for certain ailments, certain chronic conditions, also things like antibiotics in the past. We know now that antibiotics can interfere with the microbiome, and that's a really interesting concept as well. So of recent times, we've been looking into medically and naturopathically, we've been looking at something called the microbiome. And the microbiome is essentially how it sounds. It's the microbes that live and make up your gut. So the organisms that thrive there in those moist, warm environments that cause things to interact, that help you break down your food, help you with your immune system, and help the integrity of your GIT. So one of the biggest questions I get asked when clients first come to see me is, can you test me for a food intolerance? And the answer for that is yes, I can. I can certainly check whether there are any food intolerances a number of ways. I can also look at compatibility with different foods, with hair testing, blood testing, things like that. But before I do that, in a general sense, depending on your condition, every case is different, is I always like to have a look at the gut first, because the gut to me can tell us a whole lot about the way you're digesting, the way you're absorbing nutrients, and how your health is functioning overall. The gut can also regulate your mood. The gut-brain axis is a whole nother concept too that's being explored. We know that there's neurotransmitter function that occurs at a gut level. We also know that immune antibodies are produced by the gut to protect us from infection as well and to provide resilience to the body. So one of the biggest things I like to do before I even go and order intolerance tests for certain foods is to look at the microbiome. Now, there are ways that we can do that. And there are many things in my war chest that I have that I can provide as assessment tools to kind of understand what's going on with your gut. One of the tests that a lot of you will know this, especially if you see me before, that I like to order is called a microbiome mapping test. And a microbiome mapping test is essentially a sample of your stool that gives me a whole lot of information about your gut. So what it will tell me, is very comprehensive, is not only whether there are pathogenic organisms living in your gut playing havoc on your system, but also whether your functional markers are in the right ranges, whether they're working at a compatible level together. So things like, it measures all sorts of things. I'm going to show you a page from the sample result so you can see what this comprehensive test does. But what it will tell me is not only your macroscopy, which is what your stool looks like, but if you have a look at the screen there, you'll see how detailed and how colourful it is. It will tell me what your functional markers are, things like Calprotectin. Calprotectin is a marker of inflammation in the gut. So if that's elevated, we know that the gut is inflamed. Things like pancreatic elastase. Pancreatic elastase is a pancreatic marker of enzyme production in the gut. So that's going to tell me whether your pancreas is producing enough enzymes for you to break down your food. Now, one of my absolute favourite functional gut markers is secretory IgA. Now, IgA, as we know, is an antibody. So when we do food intolerance testing, we are looking for IgA antibodies, in some cases IgG antibodies. You've probably heard of that before a lot of the time. But secretory IgA is an antibody that sits in the mucosa of the gut protecting you from pathogenic organisms entering into your digestive system. So if that is low, which it is in a compromised microbiome a lot of the time, we need to find ways to increase the levels of that secretory IgA. Now, another one underneath that is fecal zonulin. Now, zonulin is, we hear this buzzword all the time, a marker for leaky gut. Now, leaky gut is synonymous with the opening of tight junction cells. So the gut is made up of all different kind of cells, parietal cells, tight junction cells, dendritic cells, and they all contribute to the lumen of the digestive tract being able to absorb nutrients selectively. So you don't want waste products from your food, what you consume, entering into that lumen, because that's going to cause the gut to become inflamed, or that's going to cause the gut to have issues, and it's going to then produce resistance to that. So that could make the gut feel bloated, it can make you feel unwell, it can degrade the lining of the mucosa as well. So zonulin is, when that lines those tight junctions, it actually opens or permeates those cells so that they open up and allow things to leak through that shouldn't be leaking through. Leaky gut. So that often is a sign. Zonulin lines the gut because it wants to eradicate some of these pathogens out of your system. So it usually means that something is coming in from an exogenous point of view or from outside of you that it recognizes as foreign. So a lot of the time when we see excess zonulin, we need to take away things that are causing the permeability, such as gluten, depending on the person. So fecal B-glucuronidase is a marker of liver involvement in the gut, and if that is elevated, it usually means there is stress placed on the liver with the way that the gut is working. So often people that are taking numerous medications or have had, a whole lot of different prescriptions over time will end up with this elevated marker, but also hormonal production. So women that have excess estrogen or excess progesterone or even excess testosterone can end up with high levels of B-glucuronidase. Men that have high PSA levels with their prostate can end up with elevated levels. So we need to work on the detox pathways to support the liver when this level is elevated. Stratocrit will look at how you digest fats. So if that is elevated, it means that the gut is struggling to break fats down. There'll often be pale stool with that. And the other one is anti-ghadin IgA, which is a marker for celiac disease. So just that little section there in the middle, that GIT functional markers area, you'll see is very comprehensive. Already I'm learning so much about what your gut is or is not doing very well, so that I can start to support those areas very specifically. Then we have the summary of pathogenic organisms that sits right in the center there, and that will tell me whether there is parasites, if there's parasites lingering, whether there's bacteria, viruses, or fungi and yeast living in the gut. And look, some of them, they are all not the same as each other. Certain bacteria will respond to different things. Certain parasites will respond to different things. Fungi and yeast all respond differently as well. They are all susceptible to different treatments. Now, in herbal medicine, a lot of the time we use antimicrobials, things like your berberine, oregano, thyme, clove oils, black walnut hulls for eradicating parasitic organisms, wormwood. All of these wonderful tools we have, but they are each not one in the same. We need to use very specific formulas depending on what organisms are found. And often, in a compromised microbiome, you will see a few different organisms thriving together in the gut, causing these problems. And they will all do different things to the gut. I'll give you an example. If you have Candida albicans widespread in your gut, that is going to have kind of a burning feeling in the gut. You're going to feel bloated. There might be chemical sensitivity that comes with that, where you feel like you can't tolerate anything anymore. There might be numerous food intolerances that start to develop. You might feel bloated all the time. You might feel tired. There's a whole lot of symptoms. You may have skin issues as well. But if you have something like Aeromonas, you may have really loose bowels. you may have a lot of pain in the upper epigastric area, and you may feel a little bit ill when you eat something that feeds that, like sugar or something like that. So they all behave differently. Knowing what organisms are present helps me to be able to support you with different techniques. Okay, now the key phylum microbiota is a very, very fascinating concept. What it will tell me is what your firmicutes are doing. If your firmicutes are elevated, it's a sign that you have elevated pathogenic organisms in your gut. But obviously firmicutes are their own phyla, so their own species, and they have a lot of subspecies underneath them. So we just look at the phyla as a whole, but it will tell me whether there are too many of them, and if there are, it's because they're in distress. Often Bacteroidetes are quite low, and they're the ones that are above firmicutes, and we look at the ratio there. Then on the second page, you can see that we have a whole lot of different organisms there, and we have their numbers, so how many there are actually in your system. So we get to then have a look and see how long you've been infected with these organisms, whether they're thriving more in the lower part of the GI tract or the upper part of the GI tract. All right, so that's when you're looking inside of this sheet, we're seeing all of the different organisms together. So if you're looking at something that's in the epigastric area or the higher part of the gut, it might look a little lower on this sheet, because remember, it's the lower part of the fecal matter that we've had a look at, but it doesn't mean that it's not causing issues. Things like Helicobacter or Candida can often thrive around the upper intestinal area and look like the organisms aren't that big. But the fact that they have to migrate all the way down to the lower bowel and they're still present in the stool tells me that there are significant numbers in the epigastric area. If you have things like a parasite that we're working to cleanse, and it starts off at a lower number and then gradually gets higher, it's actually a good sign that the parasite is starting to work its way down your GI tract and you're eliminating it in the lower bowel. So all different ways of looking at those numbers, and page 3 is very similar. It tells us more of those bacteria. Now page 3 is interesting because it also tells us what your normal bacteria gut flora is, and that is your probiotics. Now often I'll have clients coming in with gut issues that have tried a whole number of different things. 2 very popular over-the-counter products come to mind, and that is guthealth Plus and Yakult. So they often get taken as a natural way for people to over-the-counter help their gut. What they don't realize is that using things like this can actually give you too much of a good thing, and some of these organisms can feed pathogens as well. So when I'm looking at your probiotics or your good flora, when I read these reports, I'm looking to see exactly what type of probiotics I need to add to the regimen, if any at all, to try and feed the good bacteria in. If I just guess and throw a general probiotic at you, we're possibly feeding or contributing to a problem. Sometimes there will be levels of, say, Clostridium, for example, that will be too high. And that is because the gut is in distress and the body is trying to fight these pathogens, so therefore you produce more. So that can be too much of a good thing. All right, your short chain fatty acids are very important for gut function. So things like butyrate and propionate and valerate are very important for the way the gut is mobile, or the way that it has motility. So often in constipation, you'll see low levels of butyrate. So what we need to do there is work on which one is low, which one is high. So say if you had low levels of butyrate, we would increase your levels of resistant starch, and we can do that in many different ways. So I really think that instead of just going in and doing a generalized intolerance test, I like to look at the gut first, because often you'll get a lot of false positives if your gut is compromised, and that means that your diet becomes fairly restricted for no real benefit. This report can tell me whether there are certain organisms that may need you to stay off certain foods for a while, such as if you have fungal infection, we would take you off sugar. If you had excess zonulin and low secretory IgA, I would remove gluten from your diet. If you had Dissolvio Brio Piga, I would take some sulfites out of your diet. If you had low levels of oxalobacter, I would temporarily remove oxalates from your diet so that you could build that back up. So there is a lot of different things that we do based on this report, but no microbiome is the same. It's similar to your fingerprint, similar to your iris. It is unique to each person and unique to each lifestyle, and things like travel, certain foods that we eat, medications, stress. Certainly at the moment, that's a big feature. Previous infections as well can affect your gut. There's so many things that affect our gut. It is the solar plexus of the body. So the gut comes first when it comes to health. If you would like to book an appointment with me to look at your gut, I love to organise tests like this. They do take a good couple of weeks to come back to me. So in some cases, if you're a new client and you'd like me to do a gut report for you, you can get the ball rolling by getting this test ordered. All I need you to do is email me your details and let me know that you've seen this video and you would like to order a microbiome mapping test and have an initial appointment with me. I can get the test ordered for you. You pay for that test, it's $385, and then the results come back to me, and then when we sit down for our first consultation, I will have this as a tool to use to be able to look at your gut and talk to you about what the steps forward are. Okay, I look forward to talking to you about that in the future, but I really, really love looking at the microbiome because it's one of the tools in my war chest that helps me to adequately treat you and get the results that you're looking for. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.